Here we go. So thanks, Dylan. Thanks, Aaron, for organizing this, and Vault Performance for having me on. And and the online workshop series has been outstanding. I really appreciate all the content you guys have been putting together, and I'm really honored to be part of that. We'll just jump right into it here. So obviously, this is called the Strategic and Practical Approach to Athlete Preparation and Condensed Preseason. And this is something that for each team at any level and all around the world, we're all dealing with right now to some degree, and we'll all deal with it in different ways. And the idea of this is coming up with a strategy, and that's a philosophy of how do you approach this, regardless if we have 2 months instead of 4 months, or 2 weeks instead of 4 weeks, or whatever it might be. So the first thing we'd like to do is look at what are we doing right now, and obviously this is kind of the springboard to what happens when they come back, and it's really essential. And there's some actually great content on the online series that's covered this, and all the different aspects of athlete development are doing things with athletes at home, whether it's telecommunication, Zoom meetings, giving them training programs, whatever it might be. And then we have our sports science initiative, where we're sending out surveys to get kind of qualitative and quantitative information, as well as wellness. And this hopefully allows us to adjust and provide information to what, the different personnel, some additional feedback that maybe we can catch things and correct them, rather than waiting 3 months and find out there's an issue, back in May or June. Hopefully we can catch it before then. So the Sports Science Committee, and this is something that I think was important to mention as far as college athletics. And so a lot of universities, don't have a sports scientist, and if they're lucky enough to, they might have one for the entire university. And so what we've done is put together a Sports Science Committee, which is comprised of all the different aspects of athlete development, and try to tackle a variety of things, but kind of the main thing is how do we integrate and help teams integrate and best utilize the sports science type interventions. And a lot of it has to do with the technology. And also we want to investigate any new technology. So if a team gets, often, a coach's friend has a new company and they want to implement something, and so the coach says, you know anything about this? And so now they have somewhere to go that we can check it out, test it, and just give information. It's not, say you can use it or can't use it, but we'll give them information how to best use it, or if it is useful. And also a structure for a means for research, if we want to do longitudinal studies with it. And then the last part is creating a systematic application of the sports science. And so this really has to do with what we're doing right now. And we're putting together a package of preseason testing. Not that every team has to use it, but we're trying to make something quick and efficient but comprehensive. It's available to every team, and then they might add some things onto that. And also we have sports science team liaisons, and so these are people that are on the sports science committee that are dedicated to each team. So, and they're not there to do the work for them, but they're to help each team integrate whatever they want to do that's customized to them. And so it's really to help their staffs integrate this stuff. And then we have educational programming, where we're doing a lot of online learning right now. We have Karim from Vault is actually doing programming once a week for our performance and athletic medicine staffs, where we're learning how to use the technology we have even better. So really we've created an infrastructure where we have the testing and everything in place. We have the personnel that's connected to each team, and we have the knowledge and ability dissembled throughout all the personnel and through the infrastructure. So jumping into the preparing for the preseason, and obviously this is something that we do within basketball, and then this is helping our sports science committee helps kind of integrate the same philosophy throughout all the teams to some degree. And so when we come in, obviously the team training is the most important thing. They're there to play the games, and often if we come in with less times, coaches are going to be in a situation where they're going to say, man, practice is the most important thing. We need to get going. We need to learn the plays, the tactics, whatever it might be. We need to work on our game. And obviously that's true. And we have to know that. We have to communicate that we know that the team preparation is number one. but also there's some physical qualities that if we're not fit, if we don't have the conditioning towards the end of the game, it doesn't matter how well we know the plays or how technically good we are, that we might not be able to finish and win the game in the end due to a lack of physical preparation. So if we have less time, how do we combine those two things? Well, a big part of it is we would need to be super strategic and specific in how we implement our interventions, and we can't take a lot of time. In addition to that, all our athletes at home have a variety of different resources. Some people are stuck in their house, some people can go to gyms, some people have personal trainers. And so there's a huge discrepancy between the preparation going on right now. And so a big part of identifying that who has what kind of preparation and where they are is doing the testing. And so two kinds of testing that we do is looking for biomechanical deficits, movement impairments. And so that takes us into, we have those two kind of testing and performance testing. For the point of this talk, we're going to focus mainly on the biomechanical analysis and the movement testing. And these two things are, looking at range of motion and strength, and then maybe force plate testing, how we create force, dissipate force, how quickly we create force. And so looking at those two kinds of testing, our biomechanical analysis, what we'll do is we'll look at individual player results. So you can see that he might have some range of motion, internal rotation deficit. He might be tight in the front of his hips. He might be weak in his glutes and his glute med and also his glute max. And then we have thresholds for each test. And so if they surpass a certain threshold, they get a certain intervention. And so some of this is kind of basic, but rather than having an athlete come in and say, okay, you need to roll and stretch, we can be very specific in targeting which things we need to address. But then also we look at team deficits. And so if the entire team has anterior hip tightness based on our thresholds, we need to give the entire team a certain intervention or a glute weakness. We need to make sure we're addressing that as well. The second part is looking at our force plate testing. And so this is an example of two different athletes on their testing and how their profiles might look. And so for people who might not be super familiar, so the purple area here is our eccentric loading. So that's doing a counter movement jump here. And so this is the point when they're going to hit this kind of change and go over to the orange. That's when they go into the concentric phase and they're pushing up. So this guy here, basically how he looks is he doesn't use his hips. He doesn't load with his hips. He hinges at his hips, he leans forward. And then when he goes to the concentric, it's all up, all his power is coming from the concentric phase. And ideally, as you're getting at the bottom point of your loading and your jump, that this would be going up, right? And so obviously he's not loading on his eccentric phase and everything's coming from that last push. Then the other part of it, if you look up here on this is his landing, is landing over 7,000 newtons. He weighs about 1,000 newtons. So he's landing at about 7 times his body weight, peak landing force, right? And so those are the three things with this guy. And then the other part is this whole purple face is really long, that it takes a long time to do it. So he hinges forward, he hits really hard. So he's someone you might say, man, he's stiff with his hips, or he doesn't load with his hips. And then the second guy, he doesn't get down very fast. So he takes a while to get down. And then when he gets to the bottom of the eccentric loading, he starts developing force better, but he takes a long time to do it. He doesn't really get off the ground really quick. And so he weighs about 220 pounds, but he's moving like he might weigh 320 pounds. So someone who's 320 pounds might not want to drop down real fast. And so he takes his time getting down, but also as he starts to change from the eccentric to concentric, the end of the eccentric phase, he's developing force, but it's just taking a long time to do it. And again, the phase of the eccentric loading phase is really long. And so if we say, well, we have to develop a roadmap for that, right? So we have our individual deficits, we have our team deficits, and then we have our force plate testing with two different kinds of people move, right? And so the individual deficits, that's something we might, obviously they can come into the training room, even in the weight room, they might do some stuff, that we give them their individualized programs. But the team deficits, that's something we have to see. Rather than having the whole team coming into the athletic training room to do some stretches or their program, which if that's what you normally do before practice, that's fine, you can add that in. But we want to be able to address this over and over again on an everyday basis. And that's the only way you're going to make change. And so we have to look at all the different places throughout the day that the team is doing things and where can we integrate these things. And then again, like I said, then we have our force plate testing. How are we specific to address how these two different guys move to correct them specifically? right? So then how do we do all that in this time, this decreased amount of time that we're trying to also do team preparation? So there's two things: seamless integration and strategic coordination. I think these are the two things, at least for us, that are essential to create a large impact in a shorter period of time and not affecting the team development. So looking at seamless integration, what does this mean? Well, again, we have our biomechanical analysis where we're looking at our range of motion, and then our force plate testing, we're looking at our force creation dissipation. But how do we take this and integrate it into all these different aspects, right? And so that's really the key. It's not that they have to come in and do 20 extra minutes so we can work on their biomechanics, another 20 extra movements every day to work on their movement. But we do this in the normal things we're already doing, but they have to be strategically implemented. And so the first thing is that just kind of give you a couple examples of where we do this. This is in the training, just working on glute medius activation. Obviously, it's a basic climb exercise, but if that's someone that, man, we need to get their hips stronger first, maybe we need to activate it. So we start working on their hips. And then this one here in the bottom left, this is before our lift. This is just a normal pre-lift day. So again, he's working on his glute medius now with his glute max, right? And so everyone's doing it. Our strength coach is telling him work on the form, giving correction of how we're doing it, and then oh, my bad. Bring it back. And then this one here is during the lift, and so they have all the different exercises they might be doing, maybe upper body lifts, lower body, whatever, and also where we're doing this movement correction where now we're working on glute med and glute max again in a single leg versus the other one was in a double leg. And then the last one, this is a clip I found just online before one of our games, and so you can see they're doing the same thing. The band around the knees, so they're working on the glute med, glute max. And so the same philosophy is being implemented in the training room, before the lift, during the lift, and before a game. And so you might see some of the intervention we're doing in the training room on the first day we get back, and then if we make it to the national championship game, they're doing it on the court right before the game starts. And that's how we're able to have seamless integration throughout everything we're doing. It's implemented all the time by everybody. And then the second part is in our programming. And so obviously everyone wants to have individualized programming, and to individualize means maybe they're getting their own specific exercises, or maybe people are doing the same stuff, they're just doing it a little bit differently or getting different feedback. And so for this, there's two kinds of athletes. These are just two examples of guys that picked up doing exercises. So that first guy who maybe doesn't get down super well, maybe we give him something like this where he's doing these pause squats, where his whole thing is working on his form and how he's doing it, right? So you can give him a little correction about he's starting to go forward a little bit.
Chest up. There you go.
And he just gets that little bit of correction right now. He starts connecting his hips through his core, right? And so this might be someone who, if they're not loading really well, maybe we correct, and our whole focus is on how they're doing it, and it's lighter weight. Versus someone else, maybe they get down really well, but we need to get off the ground quicker. And so this is where their whole focus is, they already know how to get down. Let your body take yourself down, and your whole focus is on getting off the ground, right? And so they're trying to work on their last part of eccentric and obviously driving off the ground. And so that's someone we want to make sure that get down really well. We're trying to work on getting off the ground, right? And so that's how we can kind of, just two examples of individualizing those programs. And it's not that we're doing anything different at a different time. It's just integrated into what we're already doing. And then the second part is strategic coordination, right? And so obviously to make that happen, we all need to be working together. We all need to have time to make it work together. And so these are just three basic that, there's nothing, it's not like this is the way everyone needs to do it, but three phases that we've put together that it's what we typically do. And then these three phases can be altered based on the timing, right? And so in a traditional year, this phase one for us happens to be a month. It's 4 weeks. So we have about a four-month preseason. So 1 month is here, 6 weeks is phase two, 6 weeks is phase three. So when we get back, we don't know how long we're gonna have. We don't know if we're gonna have 8 weeks. We don't know if we're gonna have 4 weeks. We don't know. But however long we come back, we're gonna still integrate all three phases. It's just gonna be altered where this ends up maybe being 1 week, and then maybe phase two is 2 weeks, and phase three is 2 or 3 weeks. So in phase one, really we have phase zero, which is we do our testing, and then phase one is our physical development. So this phase is focused on getting the athlete physically better. Again, so that could be 1 week, it could be a month on a normal year. And so we have time to, before they get overly loaded and they're fatigued, we can work on how their technique and how they're doing things. And this is where performance or strength and conditioning can really make a big impact, where they're able to initiate their programs. And so it begins with technique and then starts to progress with loading. During that same time, we have technical training, so they're working in team groups, and then they have tactical education. And so if they're doing tactical education stuff, they're not getting overloaded, which then provides room for us to get more loading in the weight room. And this is a controlled but progressive loading stage. Then phase 2, we get into integrating everything. This gets into our team practice. You're kind of doing a little bit of everything. It's really, we're rapidly increasing their loads, whether it's practice loads, strength and conditioning, building their fitness. And then phase 3 is when we get our game preparation. So ideally, you want to get to super game week loading, where you're doing more than you do on a day than you do in a game, and more than you do in a week than you do in a game week. And so again, depending on how much time you have when you get into your preseason, this might actually be an area that doesn't even happen. Maybe you kind of progress to what your game loads are. You know, if you're luckier, and if you have a really shortened time, maybe this phase 3 or an end of phase 2 doesn't actually happen until a week or 2 into your season, you know, so it depends to some degree how much time you have. But again, ideally you want to progress through these phases. And then this is just a kind of a look, you know, it's just general information of, if not just, okay, yeah, these are things, but what is everyone doing? What are we doing weightlifting? What are we doing conditioning? What are we doing basketball? What's our loading? What's our focus and monitoring type stuff? You know, and so again, it's not only do we know what we're doing, whether it's in the weight room, but then we know what the coaches are doing. The coaches know what the weight room is doing. And so I think that's as important as anything, is the communication, that it's just not knowing that we know what's best for us to do, but the whole team knows what's best for the whole team to do. So then, you know, along with this seamless integration and strategic coordination, how do we progress our loading through the combination of those two things, and through combining physical and team development, right? And so, you know, we have to look at how fast and how much do we want to progress, you know. And a lot of the traditional research says, you know, you shouldn't progress loads more than 15% from one week to the next week. And then the other idea is acute chronic ratio, you know, which is a lot of different opinions and research on this. But overall, I think it's from a common sense, I call it common biomechanical sense, it makes sense. And I think it's quite useful. But if we went by that 15% rule, it's going to take us 12 weeks to get to our, based on where we typically come in, to when we get to our game load. It'll take us 12 weeks. And we're probably not going to have that. You know, and then the acute chronic ratio obviously is not useful until probably a month or 5 weeks, you know, into your loading period. So that's not going to be useful. So how can we accelerate when we're trying to do all the stuff at the same time, and our normal loading progressions aren't going to help us? So one thing is, you know, I look back, and in 2018 we went to Canada, and so we had a shortened time. So we had 6 weeks, and then the 7th week is when we played in Canada. And so this is a look at our weekly loading. So each one of these bars is a player. You know, and each of the colors here is a different week, and then the red is the week we actually went to Canada. So we played 3 games in the week there, right? And so we knew going into Canada that in 7 weeks, we had 6 weeks to prepare. The 7th week was going to be our game week, and that was going to resemble a typical ACC week for us, which is our normal in-season conference. And so we wanted to build to there. And so what we ended up doing is the first 2 weeks, we kept it about 50%. So we know our typical loading for a week is somewhere from, it's about 20,000. So 15 to 25,000, depending on the player. So if we wanted to keep it at around 50% of our loading, it's around 10,000, right? And so for our first 2 weeks, we kept it around 10,000. But then after that, those first 2 weeks, we're able to rapidly increase, right? And so what I think this does a couple things. And this is also in talking about this concept, I've spoken to a number of people around the world, and they've had similar findings, although I haven't seen any research on this. A lot of people have come up with similar findings based on, they've had to do similar situations based on international travel and preseason or whatever it might be, and had similar results. But what I think this does is you give them a subtle base. You know, it's not ideal. It's not our 4 months, but you give them the subtle base. And if there's anybody that can't handle it, you're going to find out pretty quick. If they can't handle 50%, you know, and they start showing signs, you know, you're not going to progress them, right? And so the idea is that you get this 50% base, and then we're able to rapidly increase, and really no, obviously guys got sore or whatever, but we didn't have any major issues whatsoever. And that's the kind of idea going in. And so if we have even less time, maybe we do 1 week, or 5 days or so, and then we progress. But then the monitoring is going to go along with this. And so that was from a weekly standpoint, from a daily standpoint. So this is one guy for us during that same time period. You can see some basic principles, which I think a lot of us are aware of, is that we want to have progressive load building, that we want to have in-week periodization. So this top graph is total loads. The bottom is a breakdown of IMA. So high speed, left, right, forward, jump, and decelerations for that one player over each day. And then our high speed running is off on the bottom. But as we go through, we want to have this gradual increase, but we want to have periodization where we go up, we go back down, we go up, we go back down. And so we gradually increase with periodization. We want to attain game loads. And so the 3 red bars are the 3 games we played. So we want to be able to match those amount of loads that we do in a game. But also if we have these 3 games within a week, can we match that? So we actually did that twice, where we had a 3-day period here, and then we had another 3-day period where we're able to match 3 high load days in a short period of time. And so that we're able to physically progress the loading, prepare the loading in the same kind of sequences that they'll end up doing during the games. And then we want to balance the ratio of movement. So like those rights, lefts, forwards, jumps, deceleration. So again, these are 3 games. You can see what a game looks like. And those games should look like our practices. And you'll see overall, just by looking at the colors, it's a pretty good ratio where the practices and the training in the games were a very similar ratio. There'll be certain days, like there was one day here where there's a lot of high jumps, where it was probably half court, just doing a lot of stuff underneath the basket, and that's fine. But you don't want to have 3 or 4 days like, and that's when guys will start showing maybe some knee or Achilles issues, where it's just they're overloading their jumping. So it's not maybe their total loads aren't too much, but they're overloading a certain type of movement. And so a general overall, we want to make sure we balance those ratios. And then the last part, you can see we actually didn't do a whole lot of high-speed running for about 2 weeks. And then we rapidly increased it. The key thing with basketball, which is different than, each sport's a little bit different, where we don't actually do a whole lot of high-speed running. And so our high-speed running for our game is between 100 and 150. And so, even though we didn't do a whole lot, we were pretty close to our game for several, for about 2 weeks before we went into our games. So to summarize that loading progression, over a week period, we want to build controlled loads for some kind of period, whether it's 1 or 2 weeks at about 50%, and then we can rapidly increase. Maybe it's 20 to 40% load increase or from week to week. And then from a daily standpoint, we want to progressively build, have the in-week periodization, and balance the ratio of movements, as long as, as well as we want hopefully attain game loads and multi-game loads if we can. So then the last part of doing all this is, how do we monitor this progression? And so there's a couple of things that we use, a bunch of different devices. And so, we do take their weights every day before and after practice. And this is kind of it's like a touch screen. You hit your icon, your weight pops up, gives you a questionnaire, five question questionnaire. And this is the scale that you're standing on. So we use called force plates, NordBoard, force frame. And then we use Catapult. We have Clear Sky in our practice facility and game arena. We'll use Whoop, and then some Polar. We don't use Polar all the time. It's kind of tricky with basketball, but usually with our conditioning stuff in the preseason, we'll use heart rate monitors. And so 2 principles that I just want to touch on here with the athlete monitoring. Intensity over duration, meaning that often it's to prepare them to play the game, we have to go at higher intensity. And again, that's not saying the first day come in going super hard, but in general, especially when you get after that first loading phase, we want to have higher duration rather than longer practices. And then the second thing is, when do we modify some loading? Okay. And I have these 2 things on here, and I think this is most important, because the idea of load monitoring sometimes gets a bad rap where people use it to hold people back. And, we don't want to do that at all. We want to use it to build guys up, but make sure we're doing it very strategically and positively. But then if there is a situation we need to hold a guy back, we're able to do that as well. So looking at intensity, and so one thing we'll do is we'll look at intensity, and this happens to be 2 pickup sessions of Again, each group of bars is one player, and so the blue is a day that in August, and then the red is a day in September, about a week later. And that one day we said, man, you guys aren't going. You could tell it's a lot of stuff too that you monitor. You can see we're just not playing hard. Guys are kind of messing around. We said, hey, we need to go harder. We need to have higher intensity. If we're going to play, it's better to play 3 games and go hard rather than 5 games and not go hard, right? So we need to increase the intensity. So they came back the next time, and then obviously they played harder, and then we could show them, we can quantify who did how much more. But then also we looked at the entire team, and the other team only went up, a difference of 9 here, right? And so if you took that 9 over 5 guys over a 40-minute period of game, and based on the algorithm we use, that would be 60 additional high-speed movements during that game, right? And so that's not, okay, they moved 60 times fast. It's 60 more times fast than what they would have done in the previous game. And so that's one more high jump, one more quick slide, whatever it might be. And so each one of those movements could be a play. So if you said, man, what if we played a certain game and then we had 60 additional high-speed movements? How would that impact the game? And obviously that would have a huge impact. And so, we communicate that with the guys that help have positive reinforcement, and obviously that'll help improve team performance. But also it physically prepares them. And that's really the key thing in this shortened time. We want to be not only balance the loads, we want to have the right intensity. So we want to be, when the time we're out there, we want to make it most impactful. We want to be going hard. So we have obviously better team performance, but better physically prepare them. And also that will reduce our injury risk if our guys are going hard versus not going hard and all of a sudden they get in the game and they have to really turn it up. And then the second one, which is a little bit of a busy, a lot of stuff on here. But this is, on the left is our force plate testing. On this top part, it's our catapult acute chronic ratio. And then the bottom part here is just a table I put together. Our acute chronic ratio is in the green. Our force plate testing is RSI mod. It's basically an overall jump performance for people who don't have a lot of experience with it. Our eccentric rate of force development, and then our peak landing force. And then the bottom part is soreness based on our subjective questionnaire. And so we have 5 days here that have marked out with the arrows. The same arrows on the force plates is the same arrows over here on the chronic ratio. And if you look at the first orange one, first of all, if you look at the RSI mod, the overall jump performance, and this actually looks the same if you look at his jump height. So his performance overall doesn't change a whole lot, right? And I think that's important because you might say, oh man, he's still jumping, he's still doing it. But athletes are the best compensators out of anybody in the world. So they could be worn down, they could be broken down, something could be wrong, but they're going to find out a way to get it done. And that just means they're compensating better, right? So that one of the things we want to really is not just see what's their quantitative output, but how are they getting there, right? And so if we look at this first orange arrow, this is the day if we look at his acute chronic ratio, it's a little bit high. It's 1.83. So we know he's a little bit higher loaded. His RSI, again, is high for all these. His eccentric loading is dropped down. So his ability to get down is eccentric rate of force development. So basically how quick, and I think really I would say how well he gets down is decreasing. You see it's going down. And then his peak landing force is going up, right? And so again, my take on this is the eccentric loading is kind of like, for our guys, it's a performance indicator. How well can he get down, and how well can he get down basically into a stance and really low if he had to jump back up. And the peak landing force is kind of an injury indicator. So if that's really going up, that means he's landing really stiff. And to me, he's an increased risk for injury. But also it's a decreased performance because your landing is the beginning of next jump. So if you land really stiff, you're not going to get back off the ground really quick again for your next jump. So going back to our progression. So he's pretty highly loaded on that Saturday. We had off on Sunday, and then the blue arrow is coming back the next. His loads have dropped. All right. His eccentric rate of force development has improved. So higher on this one's better. So he's improving. His peak landing force has gone down. Then going back to his loading, we had a week that was a little bit easier. So his loads are even further down. So his eccentric rate of force development continues to improve. And then his peak landing force continues to go down. So this is more, you might say he's even more recovered now. So, so we had a little bit of an easier week. But then we had 3 really hard days and his loads were up really high. Right. Again, his RSI hasn't changed a whole lot, but we didn't test on this day. So we practiced Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. All right. And his, obviously his loads are really high. And then also on his subjective reporting, he was really sore. And then when you watch him in practice on that Thursday, you could tell he was lining really stiff, right? And that wasn't one of our days to test. And I wasn't getting the research or the inquisitive side of me said, man, I wish I could test him on the force plate right now, but there was no way I was going to tell him to get on the force plate and tell him to jump up really high and land, knowing that he's probably not going to have a very good test. But if I had a guess, his eccentric rate of force development would have dropped way down, probably lower than this orange one here, and his peak landing force would have been even higher, would have been way up here, right? So he probably would have been 9-10 times his body weight on his peak landing force. And so he was this is one snapshot of what a lot of our guys looked at, and so we communicated a lot of this information to our head coach. And he said, and we never cancel practice because of loading, but he could tell by what he's watching it, and then what we gave him is quantitative information to reinforce what he was already seeing. And so what we did is on Friday, we ended up telling the guys, we still had them come in, but we did recovery day. We didn't have practice. All right, so we had recovery day on Friday. They came back on Saturday, practice Saturday, off on Sunday, and we came back on Monday. And this is how we looked on Monday. So our loading was fine. It was a 1.22 in acute chronic ratio. So he's in that fine loading phase. Again, his RSI hadn't changed a whole lot, but his rate of eccentric rate of force development was the best it's ever been. And his peak landing force was back down, right? And he didn't have any soreness at all. So kind of the key points to this is, if we came back on that Friday and then practice again on Saturday, there's a good chance that he would have got hurt, right? So his peak landing forces were going way up. And so if we push him, he could have got hurt. So hopefully by doing that, we prevented an injury. But then the other side of that is by doing that, having that extra day of recovery and not overly loading him. So sometimes it's not what you're doing. It's, if you practice, it's what you're not doing, right? And so if we came back on Friday, not only are we loading him more, but we're not recovering. So now you're adding loading on top of loading, and by the time you get done with Saturday, they might have Sunday off, but that might not be enough time to recover by Monday. So not only did hopefully we prevented an injury on that Friday, but by that Monday, we're in a position that physiologically, being the best place we've been all preseason, now this week going forward is going to be so much better, right? So again, it's about preventing injury, but also setting this athlete up for that whole next week going forward of having the best week he possibly can, and not kind of struggling through. Now we get a whole week of we're trying to increase loads again, and he's kind of broken down a bit. So then the last part of the monitoring, so if we look at physical development, so again, if we have a short period of time, and so this is over a period of 6 and 7 weeks, and so these are the same two guys. So the guy who doesn't get down and use his hips, again, we wanted to see a significant increase, and so he significantly increases his ability to eccentrically load through the force plates. Again, he was flat here and didn't really push until he was on his concentric phase. Now he's really eccentrically loading into it. And then his overall time, so if you look at the width of the purple, is significantly less. So he's doing it at a lot less time. And then the other guy who is 220 pounds but moved like 320 pounds, where he jumped well, but he took forever to get off the ground. Now you can see that curve is much steeper, and the purple is a lot shorter time. And so he's putting more force, he's doing it quicker and more rapidly. And then the last thing the first guy his peak landing force now is down to about 4 to 5 times. It's still not where we want it to be, but it went from 7, now it's down to between 4 and 5 times his body weight. And so then we want to say, well, were we impacting the things we wanted to impact? So not only is it we want to get better, but ideally we're getting better at the things we want to get better at, right? And so that first guy, the thing is, he wasn't getting down. So we increased his eccentric rate of force development in 6 weeks by 91%, and his peak landing force decreased by 38%. And then the other guy that was taking forever, he increased his eccentric loading time, improved it by 43%. And so, we want to be strategic in how we're implementing our stuff, but then we want to review and say, well, we're actually, rather than saying, hey, we're getting improvement, but where are we getting improvement? Are we getting improvement where we know we need to get it? And then we can modify our interventions based on that if we're not. But also if we are, we can show them and say, hey, I did this a number of times, on a weekly basis. Hey, look, we're putting all this work in, you're really working on getting off the ground. Now you're getting off the ground this much quicker, and I'll show them a comparison of his last 5 jumps or whatever it might be and how things are improving. And also, obviously, we show them 2D videos really quickly of showing them the qualitative improvement as well. So in preparing for this preseason, we go through this whole phase of our testing, of our training. We want to strategically progress our loads, and then as as we find out what when we go through our findings of our monitoring, it's important to also come back, and then this is on a weekly, monthly, daily basis, that do we need to do more testing? Do we need to do different physical preparation? Do we need to do different team tactics if something's not working from a team standpoint? Right. So kind of summarizing this aggressive loading preseason, we want, first, it's essential to have a good base, and that's what we're doing right now. We want to analyze our athletes. Again, some things might get cut out, but I think it's imperative not to cut out your testing. You might cut down your testing, but you don't want to cut it out. You really need to find out where each player is and where their deficits are. And then we want to be seamless in our integration and strategic in our coordination, where we're all working together and we're able to implement our findings of our detailed analysis without actually adding anything. We're just adding it into what we're already doing. We want to progressively load our athletes, and like I said, I think it's extremely helpful if you have some kind of relatively lower load to begin with, and that also allows you to get in your strength and conditioning preparation, technique training, corrective exercises, and then once you get that base, then you can rapidly increase it a lot faster than that 15% per week. We want to monitor and respond, and so we want to respond. Do we need to increase our intensity, or do we need to, if we get to a certain point where a lot of times we can see what's going, we see, hey, this is going down the wrong path, and not only we might not get someone injured, but what's the quality of work we're actually getting out of this? And if we hold back just a little bit, can we get even better quality for a longer period of time over the ensuing week or a couple weeks? And then the last thing is, maybe we're not at full fitness before the season starts. And this, again, it's going to depend on how much time each team has. But if, it's going to take us at least 5 or 6 weeks, or it's going to take us 4 weeks and you only have 2 or 3. The one thing we do know is if you try to load them straight away at a game amount or a game week amount, they are going to break down. If you take someone, if you have 20 athletes, 100 athletes, whatever it is, there's a certain percentage of them right now that aren't training like they're in season, right? And so if we come in and start training them like they're in the middle of the season straight away, we do know they're going to break down. So it's better to prepare them for the season rather than try to prepare them for the first game. And that's all I got.
Thanks, Nick. That's fantastic insight. If you want to, that's fine. I mean, you can leave it on that page there if you like, or I can go back to share my screen in regards to, if you want to exit that and just even share your video, we can answer a few of the questions from people who have tuned in.
Trying to figure it out.
No, that's all right. Yeah, perfect. There we go.
Am I on there now?
So yeah, I've got you, mate. That's fine. Yeah, as I mentioned, thanks for the insight there. In regards to the process that you've used over your time at Duke, where you highlighted some of the sports science technology you're currently using, how has that changed over your journey? And do you go and review season to season or within season whether or not a piece of technology is having a positive impact on your program?
Yeah, so I'd say it's constantly evolving, based on what's available, what's working for us, not working for, and we started out with let's give you a couple examples. It's camera for tracking player movement, sport view, and then we weren't. It was okay, but it wasn't tracking some of the things that we thought would be most useful. And then Catapult obviously comes along, and they gave us something that was more specific to what we wanted to know about our athletes. It's like, especially like IMA, like quick right and lefts, and so something that's a camera based is looking more like GPS, and which might be better for a field sport where they're covering more distance and looking at speeds. But for us, it's all about quick accelerations, decelerations, jumps. And so that would be an example that, hey, we had one tracking device, but it was good because it was what we, it was before maybe something else was available. And then once we found something else that was better, you kind of move on to that. And, same thing with the Vol products, so obviously a lot of stuff is new or it's newer to the US. And, once we found this, we were looking at different force plates and we found the dual force plate, and that's the one we want. And so that's where we went. And so it's constantly evolving. And, if we get something and it's not, we're not using it, we find out we're not using it, or there's something better, we move on to that, so it's really, it's a constant, assessing, reassessing, and then also trying out, so part of the sports science community, like I said, is, we test different devices. So we, especially with basketball, people are always trying to send us stuff. And so it's, one, we're always looking out for it, but two, stuff's always coming in. So we're always evaluating new technology, but also evaluating what we already have. And so it's, like I said, it's a constant process where, just trying to figure out what works best and how can we best prepare our guys.
And you spoke briefly about possibly having to cut some of your testing out, maybe if you have a condensed preseason. Have you thought about that, and whether or not there are current assessments that you're using that maybe you need to remove to just mitigate some of the noise if you don't have as much time?
Yeah, so we've, we're actually in a process of doing it now, where almost a couple different levels of testing, where some of you can kind of balance the time it takes to do something and also the value, right? And if something takes a while but has a high value, we'll still do it. But if something takes a long time and maybe it doesn't directly impact our players as much, throughout the season, it's more of, hey, it's good to have and maybe research based, then maybe those are the things that we kind of cut out, and we do a ton of, we have a K lab, which is biomechanical lab. So there's a huge amount, 3D cameras, and the tracks of force plate, VO2 max testing, so we do a ton of different stuff. And so now we're in a process of kind of going through everything we do and saying, well, how much, what's valuable, if, again, we try to go in having an idea that we're going to be able to do everything, but if we don't, we need to cut stuff out. What takes a lot of time that's less impactful to our players, and what can we cut out?
And for your guys within the basketball program, would you say the force plate analysis component is one of the more valued assessments that you're using compared to some other tests within your structure?
It's 100%. And just, kind of how I showed in the presentation, it's not only is it important for us to identify how someone's moving, and it is part of the process too. It's not like we do our force plate testing and now we're going to train them a certain way. It's that in combination with our biomechanical assessment. We also do, just basic squats, single leg hop, basic 2-day camera. So really combining all that stuff, and it gives us a complete picture of each player. And that allows us to make our training much more effective and impactful in a shorter period of time.
Yeah. And in regards to the structure of your testing, how frequently are you performing some of the tests you highlighted? For example, are you getting, because your athletes are training 3-4 times in a row, are you testing on each of those days, or is it interspersed within the week?
Yes. So when they first come in, obviously, the first week we'll do all kind of the baseline testing, right? And then with that we'll create their initial programming and correctives and things like that. But then as the preseason's been going, how we've used it the last year or so is it changes throughout the year. So the preseason, we like for the force plates, for example, we'll do that twice a week. We try to do it at the beginning of the week and then towards the end. And so we get a profile of how do they look when they're supposed to be fresh, and if they are fresh, are the numbers responding? And also when they're worn down. So like if before Saturday, often we'll do pickup or something like that in the preseason, and so we'll do it Saturday morning before they play. And so really it's to see, it's a lot of it's much for us to learn about our interventions and how it's impacting the players, as well as seeing how are the players being impacted. So we want to see how are they actually recovered? Are they fresh? And how much are we wearing them down throughout the week, and how is their body responding? And then as we get into the season, we've been doing it after practice the day before the game. So if we play Thursday night, we practice Wednesday. After practice Wednesday, we'll test them to get an idea. It's more of a readiness kind of scale. So ideally at that stage, we're not really worn down, and their numbers should be pretty good. And if they're not pretty good, it's not like, oh crap, they're going to be terrible tomorrow. It's, you talk to them, you figure out what's going on. Are they sore? Is there something bothering them? And then you try to address it. So if they test poorly and they say, yeah, man, my legs are sore, like I did a bunch of extra work the last 2 days, or whatever. Like, came in last night and I was shooting on my own and running, and for whatever reason, they had a bad game 2 games ago and they wanted to get better, and now they're sore. Well, let's get you back in the training. Let's do treatment 3 or 4 times and try to get your legs back before tomorrow. So it's very much, we want to see how is our training leading up to that. And so ideally everyone should be fresh. And if they're not fresh, well, how can we get them to be more fresh and ready to go?
Yeah, and are there certain metrics that or key metrics that you're looking at within that? You highlighted the eccentric deceleration and RFD component and RSI and peak landing. Are there any other metrics from a force plate perspective, whether it's to do with readiness or to inform some of your strength and conditioning program that you're using? Yeah,
100%. So one thing that we've been doing this year is, the initial dashboard, we'll look at obviously jump height, RSI mod to kind of give the overall. And then I'll look at eccentric rate of force development and concentric rate of force development. Is kind of the initial look on that readiness scale, because sometimes they can kind of cheat the RSI. I think if you just look at RSI and they kind of do a quick strong jump, these guys, they'll get a good score, right? But I want to know, are they actually eccentric loading, and are they actually they're getting down and they're driving off the plate? And so those are the kind of 3 things, and actually create a kind of again, it's probably less scientific and and statistically proper, but I'll kind of look at those 3 things, and if 2 of those 3 things are in the the top 3 over the last month, or I can't remember now if I look at 2 months or 3 months, I think over 2 months, I'll put them as excellent. So each guy gets a rating, right? So part of this report after practice the day before a game, we have, I actually have a thing on here if you want me to flip down. I can kind of show you what, so this is something that, I'll have daily loads, what was the total practice, what was in practice load, what's our catapult readiness, basically, acute chronic ratio, what's our force plate testing, and then injury, and then body weights, right? And so the force plate, I'll have excellent, good, fair, and poor. And so based on those 3 tests, if if 2 of the 3 are in the top 2 or 3 of the last 2 months, they'll be an excellent range. If they're in the kind of the middle 80%, they're good. If they're in the lower 20%, they're fair. And then if they have 2 of them that are like they'll tied for the last or worse, 2 out of 3, they'll be in the poor, right? And then based on these, you kind of talk to them and figure out, do we need to do more intervention or whatever it might be. But also that's kind of the readiness kind of part of it. But then also, we'll look at, obviously peak landing force and then asymmetry in all those different areas, to see is there anything specifically going on, especially if they have things that are bothering, say, my ankle sore. We'll look at the asymmetries, and also combine that with the catapult, movement right and left, IMA data. And very often those things are going to correlate, where if their left ankle hurts, they're going to land harder on the right leg and push off the right leg more. But also that they're going to have decreased movements going to the right, because they're not going to want to push off the left very strongly.
Yeah, great. I love the concept that you use around a lot of these monitoring tools to help inform better training standards and or making sure that guys continue to train, because as you mentioned, I think sometimes when we talk about load monitoring or markers of readiness, we can look to try and get athletes to do less. But from my experience, and definitely from chatting to other practitioners, making sure that we continue to get guys training consistently and training hard. And you demonstrated with some of the intensity components that that actually becomes an injury prevention and a performance component in and of itself. So I think it's really interesting to kind of see how you combine all of those concepts. When you, with being at Duke for a number of years now, have you been able to begin to see trends between some of the starters versus non-starters, or possibly when we talk about team performance and what metrics or tests actually identify some of your better performance when it relates to basketball on field?
I would say, like I'd say with the force plates, we haven't been using it long enough to identify something like that, over many years. The one thing we have looked at is intensity of movement, is from a team standpoint. In a way, it's kind of common sense, but we have pretty good quantitative data to support it. That if we say with the catapult data, if you have the entire team movement of whatever a period, divided by the number of minutes and players, you see basically a per player intensity for certain segments of the game, and then we look at the plus minus score of the game, and the higher the intensity, often, especially if you have over a threshold, say you create a certain threshold, say it's 100, right, or whatever your arbitrary load is. If it's over 100, your plus minus goes up. If you're under 100, it tends to go down. And so, that equates to if our entire team is playing with higher intensity, and a big part of the intensity is based off of IMA data, so acceleration, so quick right, left, forward, jump, deceleration. So if we're playing hard, our point differential goes up. It's a positive. And if we're not, it tends to go down. And that's something we've seen over segments of the game and entire games. But then kind of going into the force plates or the readiness, that you need to be able to create that force to do it over and over again, right? So you need to have the proper loading and the preparation going into it for your team to have that. But individual player, and then the players, it's a little bit, there's definitely some higher intensities are with the better players. But again, I don't know that it's kind of hard to, especially when people play different minutes. So the loads are gonna be different. Intensity, sometimes the intensities are really high for a guy who plays 2 minutes, and he might be playing 2 minutes because he's not as good, but that doesn't mean that he's better because his intensity was higher.
Yeah, that's interesting. You spoke about the loads and progression of loads. When you talk about the intensity versus the metrics that you showed, how are you moving forwards? How are you looking at managing that component while you're trying to build the base? Are you looking at volume is key initially, and intensity is the factor that you need to monitor and modify the most, because that could possibly be the higher risk factor to injury? Or are you allowing both to kind of develop at the same time after you've created that base?
That's a good question. I think they kind of go hand in hand, and what happens in that phase one, if you're kind of going by that the types of activities, kind of the group tactical, or technical training stuff, might be high intense movements, but there's a lot of breaks, right? So it's not constant, so if you're in a group of 4 guys, 1 guy's going and then 3 guys rest for a second, and so it's, even though it's high intensity, it's not highly fatiguing, where it's constant high intensity all the time. And so that's, when we're talking about higher intensity, that doesn't necessarily mean you're killing them with high intensity, right? But it means you're not kind of walking around and, not going hard at all. So I think there's with it, if you match, if you're doing kind of group activity stuff, and you kind of you divide up the activities, ideally the intensity, and you try to have harder intensity, I think the loads will take care of itself. And then the load's really going to come from the amount of time, I'd say. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and are you, obviously with not training at the moment, in a traditional planning component of this? Are you sitting down with the head coach and the coaches, and if they are coming to you with this is the tactical and technical drills we want to use, are you informing them on how that balance works between intensity and that in-week periodization you spoke about, and educating them on we can't have those sorts of drills back to back to back because we're possibly going to be exposing the group to too much intensity within a short window?
Yes. So, I mean, a lot of those discussions have been developed through the years. And so we've kind of gone through that kind of philosophy and the concepts in the past. And so I like to think that some of that's already instilled. But it is the idea and the philosophy of the loading progression. We actually had a meeting last Monday or 2 Mondays ago to kind of basically go through all the same stuff. That, hey, we want to keep the same kind of format, but it's probably going to be a condensed version. And I think the intensity, from my perspective, the intensity, we've never gone too hard, right? But so I'm not worried about intensity being too hard. It's more of too much. It's better to go hard for 45 minutes to an hour rather than 2 hours, right? Because even if you go in 2 hours, there's still going to be a certain level of intensity. And I think the load adds up, especially for the type of activities that we're doing. That especially we have young guys are pretty resilient. They can handle 45 minutes of going hard, and a lot of it comes with our preparation right now, with the types of activities and drills we're giving them of sprinting and running. It's very specific basketball type acceleration, deceleration movements, and so they're always able to handle the intensity. Again, it's just I think it's more the amount and the time than it is the intensity that we need to control initially.
Yeah, it's interesting when you talk about that discussion of what the amount of time you've usually been used to having and how you've been able to gradually increase, I guess, duration and or the tactical components. Do you think that coming into a condensed schedule, there's going to be an increased need for identifying what the demands are that each individual needs and what the team needs, and focusing on that first and foremost, and developing other characteristics around it?
Yeah, a lot of that's I think there's a balance, obviously between the physical and then the sport, right? And so we try to be as individualized as possible in the physical standpoint. And if there's certain guys that have certain limitations physically, our coaching staff has been pretty good about, okay, we need to back down with that guy, or that guy needs a little bit more time. And then when it comes to technical stuff, that's where obviously the coaches, their thing of figuring out, does he need to work on his shooting or dribbling, ball handling, whatever it might be, and then obviously there's a team stuff of what tactically do we need. And I think it's part of this questioning, maybe in your last one, we'll sit down even when it comes week to week of what day do we want to go hard, and really it's with the coaches, when do you see the hard practice basically, right? And then we can fit in, okay, well, we need to get one day of heavy lifting in, so we want to put it on this Wednesday, right? So maybe they go on hard basketball on Monday, Wednesday's gonna be harder lift. And so they know that when Wednesday comes, it's gonna be a harder lift. And so, if they're planning on a lighter basketball, hopefully we stick to that lighter basketball day on that, because they're gonna, maybe they just had a hard lift in the morning, and then we set them up for more of a scrimmage type thing on Friday or whatever it might be. And so really we try to balance getting the physical needs, but then also whatever they need tactically. And, obviously we try to make the sport first and whatever they need, but then also build in the physical components that each guy needs around that.
Yeah, no, that's great insight, and definitely an ongoing discussion between, I guess, the performance aspect and coaching aspect. We have had one question just regarding the application you use for that weigh-in questionnaire component in the sports technology. What software are you using with that assessment?
Yeah, it's a local company. It's called SMT. It's the company Sports Media Technologies, and so their business is in broadcast, and so like the little ticker you see at the bottom of the screen, they do a ton of that stuff for like ESPN and and all the major networks. but I'm not even sure how we got in with them initially, but so they built the software platform and the scale, it's some kind of industrial scale. And so they built the program for us. I know they sell it to other schools as well now. But it's great. So we have APIs to bring in all our stuff, whether it's Catapult, we're actually in the process of getting vault information in there. And so it allows us to put, all the information from different devices, whether it's, Whoop or Catapult or Vault, all into one dashboard so we can see at one time. But also it's in real time, we get their body weights. And so, before practice starts, we know what guys' body weights are. We know if they answered poorly on a subjective questionnaire. And I think that's an important thing too. It's not that we're going to change anything based on any of the information, but allows us to go talk to them, ask questions, track them over time as well. And then, make any, corrections, or at least inform the coaches that, hey man, his body weight's still down, 3%, he's down 6 pounds or something like that, and just so we know that if he looks like crap towards the end of practice, that, maybe yelling at him doesn't fix it, that he's actually dehydrated, or maybe they need, if the whole team is dehydrated, maybe they need a few extra water breaks, throughout practice.
From an athlete education perspective, in regards to these sorts of monitoring strategies, how are you educating the athletes on some of these changes within the assessments and developing, I guess, the individual program, but then also their ownership of possibly them needing to work on the biomechanical component and or their recovery strategies?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think that's one of the things we take most important and also pride in, is that a lot of our guys come for 1 year, or not even a year, they're here for 8 months, and then they're going to the NBA. And so one of the things we tell them when they come to visit before they come here, and then when they get here, is we want to teach you to be a pro. We want to teach you to take care of your body. They're the CEO of their corporation, and their corporation is their body. And the longer their corporation is in business, the more money it's going to make. And so we really try to educate them on preparation and what it takes to prepare, whether it's physically, whether, recovery, sleep, getting in a Normatex, all the basic recovery stuff, hydrating, eating, and so having the information on a daily basis, everything is in real time, right? So if a guy comes in and his weight's down, you talk to him and figure out, oh man, I had a class, I had to go right from class to here. I didn't have time to eat. I didn't have breakfast because I had to meet with a tutor, so then that becomes the learning point, right? And so it's not that you cuss them out because they didn't eat or they dehydrated. It's like, well, let's figure this out, and so it doesn't happen again. So we have to make sure that do we need to make snacks for them, a snack bag, a lunch? Where can they go on the way? They meet with their nutritionist then, and let's develop a plan. So if I have a class every Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 11 o'clock, practice at 1:15, how am I going to eat before that 11 o'clock class? Maybe that's the thing, or maybe I pick something up and eat in class. And so all this stuff, it's about giving information and helping them help themselves. And so whether it's hydration or eating, if it's physical development, if it's something we're working on, hey, you've been putting a lot, like I said, with the force plate, we're putting a lot of effort into improving this one aspect of training. Every day you're not every day, but the 2-3 days you're in the weight room, you're working on getting off the ground quick. Here's the results. And you sit down with them and show their individual, and it's not showing the team everyone's results, it's showing their guy, here's your individualized stuff. He gets his personal attention. He sees how he's improving. He sees connecting the work that he's doing with the actual outcome. He might feel like he's better, but we can actually quantitatively show him, man, look how much you've improved. That gives him confidence and really motivation to go back and keep working on it. Even the Catapult stuff, a lot of, the game data, I won't show each player. I showed the entire team, the reports of the team information, but I won't show individual players to everybody, but I'll show their intensity. Here's what your intensity was. This game you played great versus another game, maybe this intensity was a little lower, you didn't play so good. So whatever you did, whether it was your physical preparation, mental preparation, eating, mindset, who you talked to, didn't talk to, whatever it might be, that got you ready for that. And also for us, for the loading going up to that game, what did we do for their preparation? How can we make that happen again? And what are all the key things that help you have high intensity in a game, even in a practice? As we're, if it's, man, you had a good practice this day, and this is what you did, versus another day, and you weren't going really hard, and here's the outcome.
yeah, that component of athlete education, and especially for you with collegiate athletes who not only have the component of the sport that they play, but then also the academic component that would be having a massive impact on their physical and their mental state is a really interesting one. Do you see with this condensed schedule and obviously also the academic side of their schooling, do you see there being any conflict or issues with coming back into a condensed structure, and how your athletes are going to be able to cope with that plus the academic requirements?
Yeah, so well, we have no idea what it's going to look like, to be honest. So it's kind of hard to answer that. But I mean, there's a variety of ways that stuff could be largely online, and so then it almost makes it easier. Where if you have more flexibility, and it could be where some schools are now announcing that they're going to start a little bit early in August, and they're going to finish completely by Thanksgiving in November. And I think the idea is that basically get everything done, send them home before that maybe a second wave comes. So I don't know what that makes. I don't know if that changes the academic calendar. If they're used to having 1 or 2 classes a day, do they have 3 or 4 now? And obviously that can make it a lot harder for practice and recovery. And they already have a ton of work to do. Does that give them more work in a shorter period of time? So I mean, it could, like I said, it can really vary, but it can definitely have a huge impact.
Yeah, I think the uncertainty and the adaptability that's going to be required over the coming months is certainly going to be interesting. And from what you've laid out today, you've got a framework that will allow you to approach that, whatever it looks like. And I'm excited to see what the future holds for yourself and Duke in regards to the framework you've shared with us today. So I really want to thank you, Nick, for sharing your insights into the program that you've been working with at Duke and the frameworks that you've created to help better prepare your athletes. It's a really insightful look into how you apply different technologies within a philosophy and a framework, and hopefully you're back with your players soon and able to integrate it all into a successful season.
Well, thank you, and again, thank you for the time and having me on here, and it's glad to be part of this this really terrific online workshop series you guys got.
Thanks for today, Nick. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we look forward to staying in touch. Thanks everyone for joining us today. As I mentioned, we've got the week ahead of the College Athlete Series, so I look forward to connecting over the following week. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you.